Okay, hello. Today is the 17th of May, 2023, and on May 17th, this very important German architect, Hugo Häring, died. He was born on the 11th of May, if I remember well, in 1882. But let's read a little bit about him. So Hugo Häring, indeed, he was born on May 11th, 1882. So he was 5 years older than Le Corbusier and died on May 17th, 1958. Was a German architect and architectural writer, best known for his writings on organic architecture and as a figure in architectural debates about functionalism in the 1920s and 1930s, though he had an important role as an expressionist architect. Häring was born in Biberach in the kingdom of Württemberg. A student of the great Theodor Fischer, he took the view that each building should be uniquely developed according to the specific demands of the site and client. Few of Häring's designs were built, but he was a strong influence on his friend and colleague Hans Scharoun. One built design was a contribution to the Siemensstadt housing project in Berlin from 1929 through 1931, which was master planned by Hans Scharoun. Häring was a founding member of both the Ring and Siam, Congrès International d'Architecture Moderne. He was married to actress Emilia Unda in 1918. The couple later divorced and he married actress Roma Ban in 1950. He died in Göppingen, age 76. Sorry about this, intimate details, so to speak, but that's how they were displayed or posted on Wikipedia. This is a small resolution picture. We are going to see some better ones. I mean, the same photographs, but better resolution in the second presentation. Hugo Häring. And here he is with Hans Scharoun. On the left, Hugo Häring. On the right, Hans Scharoun, indeed a very important expressionist, German expressionist architect. And here he is with Miss van der Rohe. Miss van der Rohe on the left, on the right, Hugo Häring. Some drawings by Hugo Häring. Of course, manual drawings, but because at that time, the digital technology didn't exist. As you can see, an architecture that was reluctant to use the strict 90 degrees angle and the orthogonal geometry, as architects call, straight lines and 90 degrees angles. In this sense, his architecture was indeed organic, but his organicism is different from Frank Lloyd Wright's and other architects. This is European organicism. Too bad here the resolution is not great. This was to be a very interesting house. We are dealing here with an architect who was polemical towards the so-called orthodox modernity. I would almost say that his architecture is some kind of a rural modernity. And this could say a lot, because I think in the present, we need maybe the village more than the city, because the village still has nature and we depend on nature. We abuse nature. We have to save nature as much as possible if we are to save ourselves. So the architecture of Hugo Häring, I feel, is very relevant for our time. The plan of a house, as you can see, it is organic, almost expressionistic. He was not afraid to, have rooms that were not orthogonal and or rectangular. And I think this is a virtue. although some people or some schools of architecture criticize this sort of thing, but I don't think it deserves criticism, but rather appreciation. This is his most known work, Gut Garkau. This some kind of a farming complex, and is quite accomplished. We are going to see many pictures of it. So we start with this. From 1922 to 1928, he built this, I would say, some kind of a farming complex in a rural area. And but the architecture is, surprisingly modern. And but its modernity again is different from many of his colleagues, if I am to call it so, to call them so. And it's an architecture that is more earthy. It's not afraid to use wood, brick, and gentle geometry, which is repugnant to employ the stringent conceptions of, let's say, Villa Savoie. This kind of architecture, I think, is appropriate for our time because it is more sustainable to begin with. And it doesn't represent a triumph of man over nature, but some kind of an attempt to negotiate between the two, between the humans and nature, between culture and nature. And when you think about it, this is an agricultural complex of building. There are several sections of this building, and we are going to see them. But it has an obvious monumentality. But it's if I am to express myself oxymoronically, it's a modest monumentality. This barn here, which is also designed by Hugo Häring, has a very impressive structure, and we are going to see it. This house, I don't think was built by him, but what is around it, yes, Hugo Häring. It looks like the building was abandoned or so, and it's possible. I mean, Le Corbusier had many adversaries, but I think a voice, a sensitive voice like Hugo Häring's brings, a potential, conflict with Le Corbusier at a different level. What I mean is, here Hugo Häring didn't represent, the arrogant, let's say, French Academy, but it represented a different sensibility in architecture, and this different sensibility in architecture, in my opinion, is very welcome today. This is the barn that we saw earlier, and I hope I have images also from the inside. So as you can see in this picture, this is a building or a complex of buildings that fit in their landscape, and they do not aggress in any way what is around them. And this is important. And at the same time, they do have personality, and they do assert themselves, but rather in balanced ways. This is the structure of the barn. Probably some students of architecture or architects studying the building inside. Now here, for some strange reason, I stopped the the work on this presentation. So now we have to go to a second presentation where I place Hugo Häring in the context of other German architects like Walter Gropius, and I'll try to comment on a possible relationship dialectically presented between Hugo Häring and Gropius. This was the housing complex where Hugo Häring contributed in the 1930s in Berlin, but this particular presentation stops here. So now I'll go to the second one. Just a second, please. Okay, so Hugo Häring wrote, there is a very interesting and useful book called Programs and Manifestos in Modern Architecture. And he wrote a manifesto in 1932, The House as an Organic Structure. So let's read a little bit about it, or let's read a little bit from it. It still seems to many people inconceivable that a house too may be evolved entirely as an organic structure, that it may be bred out of the form arising out of work performance. In other words, that the house may be looked upon as man's second skin and hence a bodily organ. And yet this development seems inescapable. A new technology working with light constructions, elastic and malleable building materials will no longer demand a rectangular house, but permit or put into effect all shapes that make the house into a housing organ. The gradual structural shift from the geometrical to the organic, which is taking place throughout our whole spiritual life and to some extent has already taken place, has made the form of work performance mobile as opposed to geometrical. Please mention that he employs the words spiritual life. The need to create form constantly leads the artist to experiment with styles, repeatedly leads him in the interest of expression to spread shapes over objects, whereas the form arising out of work performance leads to every object receiving and retaining its own essential shape. The artist, also please note that he talks about the artist, meaning the architect. The artist stands in the most essential contradiction to the form of work performance so long as he refuses to give up his individuality. For in operating with a form arising out of work performance, the artist is no longer concerned with the expression of his own individuality, but with the expression of the essence of as perfect as possible a utilitarian object. All individuals, and the stronger they are as personalities, and at times the louder they are, the more this applies, are an obstacle in the path of development, and in fact, progress takes place in spite of them. But nor does progress take place without them, without individuals, artists, and strong personalities. There remains an essential difference between the artist and the engineer. The work of the engineer has as its goal merely the performance of material work within the limits or in the domain of economic effects. That the result frequently contains other expressive values as well is a side effect, a subsidiary phenomenon of his work. The architect, on the other hand, creates a gestalt, a total form, a work of spiritual vitality and fulfillment, an object that belongs to and serves an idea, a higher culture. This work begins where the engineer, the technologist, leaves off. It begins, well, this is something very similar was said by Walter Gropius. Let me see if I can read. It begins when the work is given life. Life is not given to the work by, sorry, I cannot read the first line. Maybe I should stop here with this quotation from Hugo Häring. So I can read holding a viewpoint alien to it, but by awakening, fostering, and cultivating the essential forming close within. Anyway, we move forward. We move forward because indeed he represents a unique voice in modern in modern architecture, and it's important to acknowledge this fact. We saw already this picture, but small resolution. Detail of the farm work that we just saw in the previous presentation, the model of that. So I guess what he was against was too willful domination coming from the architect over what he seems to be calling the architectural object. Although I dislike the word object because I think a building is more than an object and should be more than an object. We saw a picture from the inside, from the barn. Another image with Hugo Häring, detail of that barn, the structure of the roofing system, which is quite good. Wood and brick mainly. Here we have some concrete. An interesting, the staircase, all done with brick. This is the plan of a house. I don't think he built it. This was supposed to be the whole complex of buildings from which just several buildings, the ones at the top, were built. Again, the architect, Hugo Häring, who again died on the 17th of May, and that's the reason we talk about him today. There are very fine, although simple and raw details, like, this part of the brickwork. Please remember, this is a rural building, and it's actually destined to animals. It's a farming complex. Hugo Häring, the cover of a book. the plan of a house that he designed, but was not built, but with a very interesting plan. And you have an idea how radical in a way he was, to starting from the intimate relationship between human beings and their environment, the rooms, the objects they employed. And it's radically different from, again, let's say, Villa Savoie, which tried to impose from above an experience on its users, while here it starts from below, almost, we could say. The same complex of buildings in a rendering, meaning this building is also part of that. We saw already the building in various pictures. Hugo Häring. Now here, this is not Hugo Häring. I just wanted to show images of expressionist German architecture because he was very close to expressionism, so to speak, and he apparently had an influence on his friend Hans Scharoun. Expressionism is a manifestation of a desire for intense emotionalism, if I am to use maybe a disputable word, emotionalism. It's about expression. It's about spirit even. And these are values that, or forces that often we neglect, even these days. So all these drawings that you saw, the past 10 images or so, belong to what is called expressionist architecture. This is a chair. I'm actually not sure if he designed it, but if he did, I find it astonishing. I made this presentation 2 or 3 years ago, so I don't remember why I included this chair. But if it is a chair by Hugo Häring, I find it very interesting and with an appreciable complexity. Here he is with Miss van der Rohe. We saw already this picture. Again, him, again, the house that we saw, again, that barn, that farming complex, which was his major work that was built. But he also built housing in Germany, and we are going to see images of that. These are some sketches for a skyscraper or a tower, so very different from the tower conceived by the towers conceived by Miss van der Rohe before he left Germany. Again, images of Hugo Häring, but here is one of the tall buildings proposed by Miss van der Rohe in Berlin. Maybe an unexpected side of Miss before, again, he left for the United States. And this proposal was made for Berlin. And this was the plan of Miss van der Rohe for the tower that you see rendered here. This aspect of Miss van der Rohe, the early expressionism, because it's almost an expressionist architecture, is less known and perhaps worth investigating. Hugo Häring again, but here is Miss. So here I show some kind of a comparative short fragment within the presentation, Miss Häring. This is a fragment of a picture of housing of a block of flats in Berlin. This was also designed by him in Berlin in the 1930s. The master plan was made by Hans Scharoun and invited several important German architects, and Hugo Häring was one of them. He also built in Vienna, in a colony of economical houses that important architects designed, kind of a replica to the Weissenhof colony in Stuttgart. So Hugo Häring, block of flats. Is this his grave? Probably, since I included this picture in this presentation. Sorry. Now, again, it's a rather deficient presentation I had and have on Hugo Häring, although I have a lot of affection for this architect, and maybe this explains a certain inhibition I have towards him, because sometimes it's the most difficult to talk about those who are very dear to us or very close to us. Well, enough with the apologies. In this presentation, I also want to show other aspects of organic architecture. And that's why I included Frederick Kissler, who was born in Czernowitz. And he was actually born in Romania, as you can see. He was the author of this very famous project, Endless House. So Frederick Kissler, American, born in Romania, now Ukraine. So Frederick Kissler, 1890-1965, was the first retrospective in the Netherlands of the oeuvre of Romanian-American artist Frederick Kissler, a very important designer. He didn't build much, but he's very appreciated in the West and in the United States. So much so that there is a foundation, Frederick Kissler Foundation, very near to St. Stephen Cathedral in the heart of Vienna, or Vienna. Like he also contributed with manifestos, and he was a great adversary of modern functionalism. Like, for example, I read almost at random, modern functionalism in architecture is dead, insofar as the function was a survival without even an examination of the kingdom of the body upon which it rested. He came to grief and was exhausted in the mystique hygiene, in aestheticism. And he criticizes the Bauhaus and the Le Corbusier system. So he was an adversary of the mysticism of hygiene, and he advocated a magical architecture. And it's important to hear also the voices against the orthodox modernity. Like, for example, in this manifesto, he ends by saying, "I oppose to the mysticism of hygiene, which is the superstition of functional architecture, the realities of a magical architecture rooted in the totality of the human being and not in the blessed or accursed parts of this being." And I think this should be repeated, read again, and commented upon, because too many people in too many schools of thought and too many schools of architecture are still obsessed about functionalism. So let's read again what Frederick Kissler, born in Romania, said. "I oppose to the mysticism of hygiene, which is the superstition of functional architecture, the realities of a magical architecture rooted in the totality of the human being and not in the blessed or accursed parts of this being." I think he's right. He's right, and unfortunately, he's ignored. And now I show some images of his endless house that he worked on for a long time, but was not built. Here you see Frederick Kiesler inside the model of the endless house, almost childlike, toddler-like, on his knees, working inside of it. Here again, and it's he has a certain age, but like a kid, he's inside the model of the house he was working on. A very interesting designer, artist, and architect, and with very, 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 piercing observations on architecture and art. This was supposed to be a model of the endless house that he was working on. Here you see some, more precise, so to speak, drawings or fragments of that house. Here, this is actually the endless house, and the reason I included him in this presentation about Hugo Häring, because this is about the other modernity, the organic modernity, a modernity which is which has different values, so to speak, than the orthodox modernity that was that ended actually often in excessive abstraction, almost arrogant dislocation from what we call life. Hugo Häring, not Hugo Häring, sorry, Frederick Kiesler, No More Worlds. This is from a comment by Levius-Woods on Frederick Kiesler. Again, Frederick Kiesler with his endless house. And you probably, perceive a certain connection, so to speak, with Hugo Häring, especially if you contemplate the plan of the house below. Again, Frederick Kiesler is very, very appreciated. And there is even an architecture prize that is valued, the Frederick Kiesler Architecture Prize, offered by the Kiesler Foundation in Vienna. Now here he is in the back of, is him on the left, and I don't know who is the gentleman on the right, but in the back is the shrine of books that he built in Israel. That's the building. The shrine of books. Frederick Kiesler. Now this is, he worked in theater significantly, and he made some studies for possible theaters. Here is a section for such a building. He also built this cinema. I don't know exactly where he built it, and I should, but I'm sorry, I don't know where it is. Is it in the United States or in Europe? Somewhere. Here he is with Marcel Duchamp, the great French artist, on the left, and Kiesler on the right. Here he is laboring at his endless house. He also did design for important exhibitions, the Surrealists, like here. This was done also by him, the interior design for this particular exhibition. Frederick Kiesler. And now I thought for some reason to talk about Walter Gropius. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, because tomorrow I will also talk about Walter Gropius. Maybe I should stop here and let's have a discussion, and then we'll see if I talk about Gropius today or I leave it for tomorrow. Thank you.